Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour, episode number 15, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And Ravi Abbott.
Now, every week on the show, Ravi and I run through the big tech and retro stories of the week, and then, for the second half of the show, we have a very noteworthy guest, and this week, anyone that used to love point-and-click adventure games cannot miss who we've got this week.
Yeah, we've got the world's oldest game designer, Lowe from Leisure Suit Larry series.
Now, little disclaimer here, he describes himself as the world's oldest game designer. We're not being rude.
Yeah.
But Leisure Suit Larry, what a game.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. I used to spend a lot of time in a darkened room playing that when I was a teenager.
Now, we'll all say underage, we all were when we played that game.
Oh, that was the appeal. It was, a naughty kind of text adventure game, and you could do stuff that you couldn't do as a kid.
Trawling bars for women.
Yeah, and not being successful a lot of the time.
Pretty much the same as adulthood.
Yeah, it doesn't change.
But I always remember that game as well, the copy protection at the beginning, or it was an age verification, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the age verification was asking odd questions, like, kind of historical stuff that, not even adults would know at the time.
Well, I go downstairs to my dad and he'd be there watching TV and I'd be, Dad, who was the Prime Minister in 1842? And he'd be like, I don't know why, but just for school. So it's going to be great getting some of his stories because, that was really... It was probably one of the first, kind of point-and-click adventure games I ever played, actually.
Yeah, because there was a whole series that started with Sierra, King's Quest and Police Quest and stuff, and Al has worked on a lot of these games as well. Mm-hmm. So, he's kind of one of the pioneers of this point-and-click genre, which doesn't happen these days, point-and-click. There's not that many games around.
Yeah, I think everything went 3D kind of rendering and, quick-time events and all that, didn't it?
It's kind of a lost genre.
Yeah, so, I'm sure he'll have some very interesting stories to tell when he's on the show in around 35 minutes from now. Before that, though, I thought we'd run through a few stories that we've spotted on the web this week, starting with Acorn.
Acorn Computers. My God, how long's it been since you've heard that name?
School day memory, that, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if you remember quite a few years ago, in 2008, they had a company that was rebranding laptops with the Acorn logo.
I remember reading, did they ever come out? I remember reading that was going to happen.
Yeah, a few did, but then they said that the company didn't actually have any official accounts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was I think they just literally shoved it on. They'd had no trademark.
Right.
But what happened today on Twitter, and it's been going around for a while, there's a scaffolding company called AcornScaffolding.net.
Right.
And they're using the Acorn logo.
Oh, as in, I'm looking here. It's actually the old green acorn that's split in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of Acorn fans have been going, wait, isn't this trademark infringement? What's going on? Mm-hmm. And they've contacted a company that's supposedly owning the Acorn trademark.
Whose name on Twitter is Acorn Trademark.
Yeah, at Acorn_computers. And they give out the most confusing answer you've ever read. Read this, Dan.
Okay, so it says, yes, this has been our trademark for the last #Beeb30 years. So they're obviously trying to trade on the BBC Micro's 30th birthday day, I imagine. Please find another logo for your business to avoid confusion. So,
yeah, but the initial question is...
So is this now the legit use for the Acorn Computers brand? I'm confused. So this is obviously someone just asking if that Acorn scaffolding are allowed to use it, and then...
Yeah, but they're saying, yes, it's the legitimate one.
Okay.
But
I think someone's got a bit confused on Twitter here. Please find another logo for your business to avoid confusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so... But even, there are a lot of companies that own these old trademarks. I think there's Commodore Holdings is another company who own the Commodore trademark. And
yeah, because the Commodore one's been passed around quite a lot. Acorn, you kind of see surfacing occasionally,
For a company like Acorn that, obviously left that legacy of the ARM CPU that's now the biggest CPU in the world, it's quite sad to see it getting slapped on a scaffolding company, though, isn't it? Let's
totally.
be honest.
Every Raspberry Pi's out there, everyone's got ARM on their iPhones, and you've got the original legacy guys, being used by scaffolders.
Have you ever seen I think it was Acorn's last ever machine. It was called the Phoebe. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. I've actually seen one in IRL, in real life.
There's only one in the world. It must have been, was it a retro computer?
Yeah, it was, yeah. And it looked beautiful. It was the RISC PC, wasn't it? Really fast.
It was like a bright yellow case.
Yeah. And it's about, I think, 200 megahertz or something.
Yeah, sounds about right. Well, it was, that was an ARM machine as well. I think it was about 2002. They never released it though, but it was kind of finished. Yeah. But I remember they made a load of the cases, thinking it was going to come off the production line. And I remember them selling the cases on eBay and stuff around the time. So there are collectors who've got those bright yellow Phoebe cases now. But yeah, you're right. There is only one. But I remember reading on that Computer Museum's Facebook that it's broken now apparently, and they can't get it going again. So.
Well, I think I saw it when it was running because I remember this was when the Raspberry Pi was first coming out, and they had this Beagle board as well, which was an early one, and it was running, but they had an OS that was really old. So it is like the hardware was fast, but the OS hadn't actually been updated.
Okay, was it RISC OS or was it like Linux or something?
Yeah, I think it was an older version of RISC OS. So,
yeah, that was kind of a sad end to such a big company. Everyone that went to school in the 80s and 90s used Acorn computers.
Yeah, it was a very British thing as well, wasn't it, Acorn?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And now it's used on a scaffolding company, so there you go. Stop using it, please, scaffolding companies.
Yes.
Now, speaking of things from the past, that this one is no longer going anymore. Can you believe that the last PlayStation 2 online servers have just closed down in the last couple of weeks?
Oh, wow. I didn't know they were still going.
I think that's actually probably the bigger story, isn't it, that they were still online? Well, the last game that you could officially play on the actual servers that it started on was a Final Fantasy XI. Bizarrely, though, they closed the servers down for the PS2 version and the Xbox 360 at the same time, even though they're kind of two separate generations.
I must admit that I'd never played online on a PS2 or knew that there was an online service for it.
I have got one of because what you need is a hard disk adapter. It can only be the
at the back, they've got that big fat section, haven't they?
Yeah, so you put a hard disk in there, you need the hard disk adapter, and then it's got Ethernet on the back of it. So I've hooked mine up a couple of times, but every game I tried, it was probably about 4 years ago I tried it, but everything I tried was offline by then.
Okay.
It couldn't connect to anything. I didn't even know this game was still online, so I might have tried it just for giggles. But, you think about this, a machine, when did the PS2 come out? Was that 2000, I think it came out?
Oh, God, I think it was around.
I think it was the original Japanese release was 2000.
That's
you think the
pretty
year
cool.
2000, dude, that was like, we're still using, a lot of people like cassette tape Walkmans, and VHS was a predominant format still. And
well, I think it's slowing down as well now because console-wise, I know I haven't upgraded for years. And I think the life that you have a console is a lot longer now than before when it was going 8-bit, 16-bit. We were just buying new ones every year.
Well, that kind of leads us quite nicely onto the next story, which is that Sony are apparently going to be bringing out a PS4K.
PS4K? What? So this is a PS new one, PS4, but like with a 4K output? What's
apparently,
the difference?
It's only a rumour at the moment. But people have been saying that, this is quite unprecedented, them coming out kind of mid-generation with a new iteration of the hardware. Because obviously the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, they can, often barely support 1080p.
I didn't know this, because you own one, right? So can the PS4 do 4K?
No, it can 1080p, that's kind of if a game can do 60 frames a second in 1080p, that's considered really good.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's really bad because I'm a PC gamer and a lot of my games at the moment are supporting 4K. I just can't afford the monitor.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You look at it hasn't even got the HDMI, I think it's 2.0 output, for 4K. Yeah. So what they're kind of saying is, you mentioned then that, we used to kind of you'd have a console for a long time. You look at the last generation, PS3 and Xbox 360, they ran 10 years nearly, wasn't it? It was nearly a decade, and still games have been made for them now. But yeah, they're saying that really they couldn't afford to make a 4K capable console in 2012 when these machines came out. So now what they could be doing is re-releasing the PS4, which really is going to be a new console, isn't it? Because it's going to need faster RAM, it's going to need a better GPU, probably faster CPU. So what's going to happen to all those, I think it's 30 or 40 million people that own a current PS4?
Well, also, all the games are going to look a whole lot better. GTA 5 at the moment on the PC in 4K is astonishing. Yeah. So hopefully it will scale up. Well,
that's the thing. I'm wondering, will they
have re-releases?
Well, yeah. Or are they going to release games that kind of you can play on the old PS4 and the new one, but there'll be 4K on the new one and they'll kind of downgrade?
It depends if they've done it scalable at the beginning. If they knew that this was a long-term plan, they might have had it in mind to make the game scalable. But if not, they might have to release 4K editions of everything.
And it's just you're only going to be able to play it on the new PS4. That's going to create such a divide. And it kind of reminds me of when Sega brought out the 32X. Yeah, that's the only thing I can kind of compare it to in my mind. And we all know what a success that was.
Yeah.
But I remember, because Sony, I think they have done this before, though. With the original PS1, the kind of clunky grey one. I'm sure a bit later on, before they brought out the smaller PS1, as it was called, when the technology got to the stage where the chips could run a bit cooler, I'm sure they give it a slightly higher clock speed.
they had a better, nicer AV output on it as well.
Yeah.
But that was probably due to...
It actually ran quicker though, and I remember like you could compare them side by side, and some like the intros of games would run a bit smoother, and the loading times would be quicker and all that. So I think they kind of snuck that under the radar though. It wasn't an advertised feature.
Well, Sony seem to know what they're doing. So
well, it's you think they would. They've been doing this for 21 years now, so you think, but. I've seen a lot of negative response to this online. People saying, well, I only bought a PS4 2 years ago. I expect it to last me at least 5-6 years. I don't want to get the crap versions of games.
Maybe they're going from the angle like, oh, this is like the Slim, or this is, a kind of just different version of it.
Only better.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I imagine, because I've owned a PS4 since launch. And I was thinking, would I actually go out and buy a new one for 4K? And I probably wouldn't. I mean, I haven't got a 4K TV at the moment. My TV only does 1080p, but I think if it gets to the stage where maybe they're down to they're thinking maybe they get down to £200 for the new version. They're like, oh, it's only 200, just buy a new one and forget the first one you had. And
well, this week I've just been hooking up my PC to my TV and using Xbox gamepads. And I've got better than PS4 graphics, so it's just amazing. That's probably the future.
Well, they've been saying, with the Xbox and that's probably maybe they won't make another Xbox. It's just going to be a PC and which they technically are just PCs.
It's going that way with Steam controllers and sitting at home on your sofa playing.
Yeah, we can stream Steam games and all that, can't you now? So it's interesting. I mean, it's not necessarily a retro story, but I just thought, from the angle of, is this kind of unprecedented or has it been done before with any success? And I think you're going to pee a lot of people off doing it, though. I don't know.
We'll see.
Time will tell.
Will it be worth it? 4K YouTube?
Yeah. Or then, I mean, some people have been saying maybe it'll just be like 4K Netflix and stuff and the games won't be affected or something.
But you've always got to remember with stuff like 4K Netflix that it still comes down the line.
Yeah.
You're still getting it streamed to you. So even if it is that high quality, you've got to be receiving it at a good rate.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some kind of compression in there. So it's not true 4K,
Then you got your ISP going, oi, all that data you've used this month, got over your limit now. We're going to slow you down to 1 megabyte a second.
That's it.
Now, this headline here, when I read it, I'll admit I thought, is this about my dad? Man has the same phone for 10 years.
Yeah, so I thought, that doesn't sound kind of that unusual. But if you think what's happened in the decade of kind of having the phones, and I think it was an old Nokia.
Yeah.
This is like a 3310 or something. And AT&T have just contacted him. So he's been keeping this phone on, and it's been going for this long, and they've finally said, we'll no longer be able to provide a service for you.
Yeah, unless you get a new handset.
Unless you go for a 3G or a 4 LTE one, like an upgraded one,
But I mean, first of all, you've got to say, I know it's kind of a meme online these days, but Nokia's, thing's been running for 10 years and it's still working fine to this day.
Yeah. They were solid.
Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
Rock.
I love on this, it's an article on The Mirror as well. I love the description they got here. He bought the device back in 2005, before Obama moved into the White House and before anyone had ever heard of the Kardashians. So, looking at this, though, they're saying to him, they're basically going to drop anything that's kind of sub 3G. By the sounds of it. That's why you can't use it anymore.
Which is a bit odd because, all these, why drop it? The service is they've still probably got customers for it.
But this phone here, I mean, they said he bought this in 2005. The original iPhone didn't have 3G either, and that was, 2007? And remember, AT&T were the original launch network for the iPhone.
Maybe you can just change network provider. There still might be some people out there doing, GSM.
Oh, dude, I mean, you can get a Nokia unlocked on any, market stall, can't you, in any town, you know what I mean? So I'm sure if he desperately wants to click onto his old handset, there will be a way, but...
Well, talking of old handsets, I've seen some of the prices here, actually, and some of the old Nokias, like the first ever phone that was released, which is the Mobira Centaur.
Was that a massive thing?
Yeah. It's
£900. Really?
Yeah.
See, I've still got a Nokia 3310 kicking around, and it still charges, it still works just fine, but they were probably a bit more common than the early Nokias.
8110s can sell for up to £60.
Are they the small ones?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think my dad had one of them for a while, yeah. He might still have one at home somewhere. But I think, it's like anything. When they're a commodity hardware that everyone's got, they're going to sell for nothing on eBay. But then I've even noticed now original iPhones, if they're in good condition, they're selling for hundreds of pounds again now.
Yeah, your old iPod.
Yeah, well, I've got the original iPod, yeah. But my first ever iPhone, I remember I got my iPhone. It was about 6 months before it came out here. And I bought it on eBay from America, got it imported, it was unlocked and everything. I remember there was a guy who I worked with at the time, and he was like a massive Apple fan. And he didn't have one. He'd never seen one in person. And I had it in my hand. He goes, oh, his jaw dropped. Is that an iPhone? Is that an iPhone? Ran around the table. I'm like, yeah, well, calm down. But you go into bars and that, and I'd just be like, texting on it and stuff. And people are like, oh my God, is that an iPhone? You know what I mean? It was.
I must admit, I've had cheap phones for a long time and kind of always wanted to have an iPhone, but never tried it. And I was always kind of a bit jealous and a bit Apple fanboys. But I've just got a iPhone 4S and battery power's a bit crap, but it's stable.
Yeah.
That's the key to it. It doesn't crash, and all these other phones crash. And
well, I've got Android devices, and I do find, I think these days there's not as much between Android and iOS. You basically get the same apps on most of them, don't you? But I've always preferred the iOS experience, and the fact that I've had iPhones for nearly.
It just seems solid to me. And if I'm getting calls for work and texts and stuff, I need a solid phone that works as a phone. And that's the main thing.
Well, this first iPhone though that I paid like £500-600 for on eBay, I gave it to my little brother, and he had it. When I got like the 3G one, I think he had it about 2 weeks, and he dropped it and the screen all smashed and circuit board was hanging out the front of it and all that. So I threw it in the bin, and now I'm looking online, they're selling for like £700 again. I'm like,
geez, even the spare parts.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, but keep on hold of your old Nokias and stuff. It's like anything, the price will go up eventually.
Definitely.
Yeah, so props to this guy. Keep hold of it another 10 years. Now, this is probably something that works better visually, but we will link to a picture. This is a guy wearing what can only be described as the nerdiest suit ever.
It's the nerdiest suit, but it's quite stylish. It's well, would you wear it, Dan?
I probably would. Yeah, to be fair, this is a Pac Man suit.
That's it, and it's an official Pac Man suit.
Yeah, this is licensed.
It's trademarked. Yeah.
How do you even go about applying for a trademark for that?
God knows.
Go to Namco. By the way, can we make a suit, please? So what it is, it's kind of a. It's a black suit, pretty much, and it's got the Pac-Man map on, and all the ghosts are there, Blinky, Pinky, Inky, Clyde, and Pac-Man himself, which actually appears a few times around it. Look at it, it's on the sleeve. There's even the matching tie as well, which I think is very cool.
It's quite nice, because I like how the pills look like pinstripe.
Yeah.
It's kind of works nice on the lapels and stuff.
But from a distance, this could just be like a kind of funky-looking suit, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that, kind of this geek culture started to go into mainstream fashion and stuff. And, people are...
Well, this is actually a proper suit company. They're called Oppo Suits.
Yeah, it seems they do totally crazy suits. So, there's one with cannabis leaves all over it. Or you can get just some mad designs.
But actually, it's £77 it sells for. So that's not bad, even for a suit, that's pretty good. I'm getting married next year. I need a suit for that. Reckon that'll fly with the missus?
Yeah, all your groomsmen. Ghosts. Do you think you'd get a job at a tech company if you turned up in a Pac Man suit?
That's not a bad shout, is it? You're either going to get hired or kicked out, one of the two, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, we'll pop a link if you want to be a little bit eccentric and stand out. The only time I ever wear suits is to award shows and that, really. But I think it's a conversation starter, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So we mentioned before that we live in the fair city of Nottingham, and there is something a bit unique here. We've got a board game cafe.
Yeah, called the Dice Cup, and I actually went there this weekend. It was really good. I went with my girlfriend and a mate, and they've got a comic book store in there, so we bought some comic books. But they've just got all these tables set out, and you pay £5 each. You can go and sit there in there for hours.
Right.
And just play board games. So we decided, because my girlfriend's foreign, Brazilian, she doesn't know Scrabble.
Right.
So we just went old school and went for Scrabble. But it was really good fun. Everyone was playing games everywhere.
Did they have a load of different selection of games you can just play then?
Yeah, like a massive selection. But I can't believe how many people were in there. There was about 40, 50 people on a Saturday.
Really?
All sat down playing games. It was completely rammed.
Yeah.
It was one of the busiest places.
That's busier than most bars these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we were actually playing an old board game that I love called Key to the Kingdom. We've been playing that recently, but I've been getting back into board games again recently.
Well, this is cool because it's not like they're board game snobs. It's not like you have fantasy games or Warhammer.
Can you play Ludo, can you?
You can play Ludo, yeah. You can play, Jenga or whatever.
Yeah.
It's great.
I should come along doing a good Saturday night, that would be, actually, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I said I'd give them a mention on the podcast, and they really appreciate it. They've got their own little board game podcast as well that we can add in the links. Yeah.
Okay, very nice, very nice. Now, I've got a couple of Chromecasts at home, and apparently this has been tried out on a CRT TV you've seen here.
Yeah, this is absolutely insane. Some guy, he said he's not a hipster. He quoted that. He said he had an old CRT, but what he's done is he's managed to connect the HDMI output to the VHF antenna port.
Right.
And it makes it turn the TV on when you want to stream. So he's managed to connect a Chromecast to it straight away, cast straight to the TV, bing, turns
Now,
on.
we're not talking like a CRT widescreen from 2005 here. We're talking a proper 1978 one with a tuning dial and everything.
Oh, yeah, totally. And this has to warm up as well. So as soon as you started the video, it's got to warm up. The colour comes, there's a buzz.
Yeah, the black and then the fade in takes about 5 minutes.
Yeah, but it's amazing, this little hack. You know?
I love the fact he's watching lazy game reviews on there as well.
Yeah, that's it.
So I've got a couple of Chromecasts and they are great little devices, but I've never thought of trying it on a TV from the 1970s, I must admit.
Yeah, it kind of gives it a nice little vibe, watching YouTube on an old CIT.
Well, you could stream like old TV shows and it feel like you've gone back in time.
Totally.
Now, last week we had a very interesting guest for fans of the Sinclair and Sega machines. We had Jim Bagley on last week, and we actually had quite a lot of listeners in Singapore, quite randomly.
Yeah, a little group.
Yeah, of hardcore Sinclair fans. But also, one of the interesting stories that he talked about in last week's podcast, and if you didn't hear it, definitely worth a listen. He did the port of Doom to the Sega Saturn, and he told a story about how he had it running really nicely in hardware rendering, but ID Software crippled it and basically said, no, it's got to be done in software. So the game ran a lot slower than it originally did. And he was a bit upset about it, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he was saying, this was John Carmack's decision, and Romero said he would have done it differently.
He was on holiday, wasn't he? Yeah, at the time, yeah. Well, what's the update you've got to this story then?
Well, one of our listeners, Diego Barros, decided just to tweet Carmack, which is what we should have done anyway.
Why don't we think of that?
Yeah, maybe get him on the show. But he said, what was the reason why you disapproved of Doom on the Sega Saturn, using hardware rendering and only allowed software rendering? And he says a quite complex answer,
right,
which is quad distortions with perspective correction looks pretty bad, but in hindsight, I should have let it be tried.
So 20 years down the line, he's put his hands up and said, all right, I was wrong.
Yeah, but that's quite nice that, we can get a story told on a podcast and then people will pursue it.
Yeah. So,
thanks for doing that, Diego. That's great.
Thank you very much. But we'll pass it on to Jim Bagley. That might be quite nice for him to see after all this time.
Yeah, finally a conclusion to the story.
Now, speaking of a story that's got a bit of a conclusion finally, and I will be honest, I'm kind of getting fed up hearing about this story, but this will be the last time that we mention it.
Yeah, I'm sick of watching Pat's videos on it. He's doing so many. You can even tell in the videos he's getting annoyed about it. Well, you know what it is, guys.
The Coleco Chameleon, in the final end to this story, the guy behind it, Mike, has finally spoken out on the Atari Age forum. Now, obviously, anyone that's been following this story over the last, it feels like about 6 months it's been going on now, but I'm sure it's only been about 2 or 3.
This is Mike Kennedy.
Yeah, Mike Kennedy, who was really the guy behind it. And you could kind of say he went into hiding a little bit after all of the fake prototypes and that came around. He used to be quite regular on the Atari Age forums, and he hadn't posted there for about a month. It was after that last one, wasn't it, when it was a video capture card got discovered in the shell.
Yeah.
So he's actually come along now, a month down the line, and said, right, his reputation means more to him than this project. So he's tried to clear it up a little bit. What he's basically saying is he hired a guy to do the hardware, and he got duped. He didn't inspect what this guy was doing with the hardware, and he also got scammed along with everybody else.
So he's as much as a fool as all of us.
Yeah, well, he's basically, it kind of feels a bit like Damage Limitation, because I think he runs like a magazine and stuff as well.
Okay.
But honestly, have you read the thread on the Atari Age forum?
I've tried to stay away because now I feel that the story's kind of dead, and now you can't stay in a neutral stance with it. Mm-hmm. It's just like a kind of flame fest at the moment, I think.
Well, for anyone that didn't, we mentioned it probably about a month ago the last time. We didn't really conclude the story because we were covering it every week. We've had people tweeting us going, why are you not doing updates on it? But we're spending 10 minutes an episode talking about it, and we thought, we've had enough.
And because it's becoming more of a drama than an actual thing about hardware and about gaming.
Well, the end result was that the Kickstarter was cancelled. Coleco pulled their naming rights from it. So the entire thing has been scrapped now and it's not going to go ahead. But literally, Mike has been ripped a new one on the Atari Age forums. I've never seen anything quite so brutal as his thread.
Wow.
I think, he's basically, whether there's any coming back from this. People seem genuinely annoyed about it, though.
Yeah, I think everybody, it got into national press that, it was kind of a prototype held together by cardboard and sticky tape. And it was it's a very bad thing for the whole Kickstarter scene. But I guess he's got to try and get his reputation.
Well, he said he paid $7,000 to this kind of hardware designer who apparently was just putting these fake prototypes in, and he apparently had loads of conditions, like when they were at the trade show, when they had the original mini Super Nintendo in there. Apparently, he wouldn't let him take pictures of the back of it and all that. He's saying, this guy. But if you're the one that's funded it, you'd just be like,
yeah. And if you're that passionate about the console, you're going to want to look at the prototype, and you're going to be excited to see it. Look inside at everything. So,
So
not just stick it in a box and then shove it on the show floor.
Well, he's saying at the moment he's losing sleep over it, and he feels his reputation's in shatters, and he wants to get back in the community and all that. But
from what I've heard, he's quite a nice guy. So
he's got a long history, hasn't he?
Yeah, but with something like this, you've totally laid yourself open to criticism and abuse from a lot of people, I think.
Well, he's got all those Atari Jaguar shells, because selling a few of them for modders. Maybe
I forgot
about
that. That's the next project, isn't it?
That's what I thought. There's a video he did on Vimeo before this whole thing kicked off, where he actually shows you go into the workshop of this guy that bought the Atari Jaguar models, and the show how they're all pressed and everything like that. And I've got a Jag. I've actually got 2 Jags randomly, and I remember thinking, it would be cool to have they do with the Amiga shells where they're all different colours and have different LED lights and all that in there.
That project would probably make a lot more sense.
Probably more than the Coleco Chameleon.
Yeah, probably make some money.
But you just know someone's then going to release a Super Nintendo Junior and put Coleco Chameleon on the case and put it on eBay. So, it's been, a drama from start to finish, and I can't say I'm sad to see the end of the story. And hopefully that's it now. It's done and dusted.
Yeah, we hope so.
But we have had people asking if we'll conclude the story, so there you go. Coleco Chameleon is done and dusted. Over.
That's it. Over.
Right, well, listen, thank you so much, guys, for checking out episode 15 of The Retro Hour, available every week from our website, theretrohour.com, SoundCloud, iTunes, Mixcloud, YouTube.
Oh, God, we can't name any more.
Yeah, your favourite podcast client. And the second half of the show, then we dedicate to a notable guest. We've definitely got one this week.
Oh, God, he's a complete legend. Lowe. God, where is it? Police Quest, King's Quest.
Leisure Suit Larry, come on.
All these Sierra games. He was a great point and click master, and he's a very funny guy as well.
Yeah, so for the next half an hour, Lowe on the Retro Hour, and we will catch you next Friday.
Catch you next Friday.
I thought it might be quite nice to start right at the beginning, though, Al. What was your first computer experience?
My first computer experience was with a DEC PDP 1170 mini computer that our school district owned. It seemed like the perfect device to help me in my job as a marching band director, moving people around on a football field, designing shapes and geometric formations and things. So I went to the computer department and I said, I have this great idea for a program. And when they stopped laughing, they said, yeah, sure. That'll never happen. And but, actually within about 5 years or 6 years, someone wrote that program. Of course, by then I was off doing games. And really, because I taught high school marching band, I was used to moving individual pixels around on a grid. So actually putting things on a screen kind of came naturally to me.
How do you make the journey from that into games then?
Well, it seems obvious. If you trained as a musician and a jazz saxophonist, and you teach high school kids how to march and how to play in orchestra and so forth, what else are you qualified to do but write games? I think it's one of I was in the right place at the right time, and I'd had the right experiences. I was a proto geek. Back in grade school, I was the kid who fixed the projector. When the 16 millimeter film projector didn't work, I was the kid who could figure out how to fix it. And when I got into high school, I was the kid that built the speaker systems and wired ran the board and all those kinds of things. I built electronic kits. So I was always kind of geeky. And when I heard about computers in the mid 70s, I just thought, yeah, this is like the ultimate toy. I've got to get one of those somehow. And, of course, I had no real reason for having one. So I had to convince my wife that somehow I would make it pay for itself. And we dropped a bundle of money. I mean, we spent more than our combined incomes for the month buying an Apple II with 2 floppy drives and a green screen monitor about 11 inches, I think, maybe. And eventually I did make it pay for itself, I guess, now that I think about
They
it.
weren't really designed for home
but-
users, though, really, were they, computers back then?
I actually, my first program was because my son started nursery school and caught the chicken pox. He came home and gave them to me, and about 3 weeks later, I was just covered in pox everywhere. I was so sick. And these are the days before you had cable TV or internet, of course, or anything. We had 3 channels of television during the day, and all of them were horrible. So I ended up having this deck basic manual that I got from the school district because they said no real programmer would ever write in BASIC. And so they said, just take this book home because we're not going to use it. You can borrow it if you want to try. And so I started writing a program because I ran music festivals, competitive music contests where I would hire a dozen judges and give them forms that I designed, and they would hear the groups perform or watch them march by, and then assign scores in various subcategories and so forth. All these scores had to be added up properly and divided and averaged and blah blah blah. It was just a big complicated algorithm. Which I didn't know that word at the time. I thought it would be really cool to use this computer to keep the scores for my music festival. So I was home with 2 weeks with nothing to do. The school district loaned me a dumb terminal and an acoustic coupler modem.
Wow.
That I think was 110 baud, I believe.
That's quite fast for the day.
Not 110 megabit, which is what I have now, but 110, period. You could watch the characters type across the screen. In fact, I could almost type as fast as the things put characters on the screen. But what it did was enable me to sit at home. The whole second week that I had chickenpox, I was contagious and thus quarantined to the house. But I wasn't sick. I felt fine. So I sat and hacked for I don't know, I probably put in an 80-hour week that week and by the time I was done, I had entered in all the formulas that were required for this music festival. Eventually I polished it up a little bit and we became the first music festival as far as I know in the world. I've been saying this for 30 years and nobody's ever contradicted me. This was before the Apple II. Well, actually, it was about when the Apple II came out. Yeah, it was 1977. So after a couple of years of doing this with this big mainframe, then I thought, well, if I had an Apple II, I could do the same thing and sell this program to music festivals all over the world. And so that's what I did. I convinced my wife. We bought an Apple II, and I programmed the whole thing into it. And I think we sold upwards of 5 copies. When we got done, it was like, oh, yeah, this actually works. You could actually use this. And by that point, my son and I had gotten interested in playing games on the Apple II. And so I thought, geez, these games aren't very complicated. If I can write this integrated database, relational database program that had 20 different modules all calling on the same data files and doing it all on the Apple II with 2 floppy drives. And so if I can do that, heck, I can write a little game. And so when graphics packages came out for the Apple II, the first one was Mark Pelzarski's Penguin Software Graphics Magician, it was called. And Sierra advertised that they were going to have their graphics package out right away. But they didn't make it, and I couldn't wait. So I bought Mark Pelzarski's package, and it actually worked. He was a math teacher, I think. He was a school teacher, too. And ended up making friends with him, and one of the guys who worked with him ended up going on to do great things with Sega and a lot of other companies, and so it was the beginnings of the industry. I mean, we were one of the very first. In fact, as far as I know, the games that I wrote in 1982 were the first educational computer games that were games 1st and also taught something, as opposed to all the other software that we saw was educational exercises. We wrote actual games because that's what my son and I enjoyed playing. We played Sierra games mostly because they were heavily advertised and good, and we enjoyed them. So my games ended up looking like Roberta's games, and so that was an advantage that I didn't really plan on. But when we took our materials to the first Apple Fest in San Francisco, all the publishers came around and raved about the games because they looked like regular commercial games, except they were educational. And so when Ken Williams saw them, he gave me what I felt at the time was the ultimate compliment. He yelled over to Roberta, who was following him, and said, "Hey, Berta, come here. You got to see this. This guy's stuff looks just like your games." It was like, wow, that's the highest compliment. So,
Yeah, that must have been quite a buzz.
yeah, it was. I was thrilled, and so we ended up talking with dozens of publishers, only a few of which were big enough and serious enough that we, actually considered them. But Sierra was close to me geographically. We were only 45 minutes away from my house, and they were the biggest at the time. They did the most advertising. They were serious about wanting to start an educational software component, and so they took my games, and that was the beginning of Sierra's foray into educational software.
What attracted you to the genre of adventure games and games with good narratives and good stories?
I don't have very good twitch reflexes. I think that's the biggest reason. I wasn't very good at arcade games back then. Of course, there were very few RPGs or anything like that, and no first-person shooters. We played Castle Wolfenstein, but it was a horrible game back then. Anyway, there was it was the genre that seemed the most interesting to me, and I always felt like adventure games were following the path of narrative that movies had followed. When movies first started, they were very crude and primitive, and over the years they made advances until they became a good medium for storytelling. And I thought the same thing would happen with games. I truly felt like adventure games were going to continue to grow, and that at some point, we would surpass movies because, once you play an interactive game, sitting back and watching some guy on a screen do everything and make all the choices isn't as exciting, to me at least. And so I thought adventure games were going to become the storytelling medium of the future, and that movies were going to be soon relegated to like silent pictures are now, that just kind of second-class citizens where, sure, they have nice graphics and stuff, and they have pretty actors, but games are going to have all that stuff, plus you get to make all the decisions. Hasn't worked out that way yet, has it?
Well, what amazed me was the kind of immersion that you had in the game. So Police Quest, the first one was really amazing. The kind of free roaming that you could do in there, you could explore on your own. You weren't set on a kind of path,
And part of that was because it was developed by a real cop. Jim Walls was a highway patrol officer who stopped a bad guy, and the guy jumped out of his car and came back at Jim's police car with a weapon, with a pistol drawn, and aimed it right at Jim's head through the windshield and fired. And Jim said, all I could think of was, I'm going to die because I put on this goddamn seatbelt. He couldn't get out of the seatbelt and couldn't get away in time. And the guy's gun misfired, but Jim just suffered traumatic stress and injury, and ended up quitting the police force and taking early retirement. So when he happened on to Ken Williams, I think at the gym, I think they met on the racquetball court, maybe. Anyway, they started talking, and Jim had great stories. I mean, all cops have good stories, but Jim was a great storyteller, and so. When Ken said, well, there's no police games out. Why don't you write a police game? Well, Jim didn't have a clue what to do, but he knew stories, and so he wrote some great stories. He put this story together, and I think they worked on it for about a year, and they just never could get it finished, couldn't figure out how to finish it. And so Ken said to me after I shipped Leisure Suit Larry and the game bombed, it had the worst sales of any program they'd ever sold, I think. I thought, well, I've screwed up 6 months of my life. So Ken said, well, could you save Police Quest? Could you go over and help them, finish this game? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do something. I need the money. So I went over to the Police Quest guys, and in 4 months, I believe, we ended up making his stories into a game, but the whole flavor of the game and everything is because of Jim. I mean, all I did was add clues and clean up code, because when you got the game, if you didn't know police procedures, you would never be able to finish the game, because it would tell you did something wrong, but it wouldn't tell you what or how. And so it was like the most frustrating game to play, because you wouldn't do the right thing, but you had no idea what the right thing was that you were supposed to do, nor how to find it. And so so the supplemental materials that we added and the helpful hints and all that stuff made it into a game.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there were lots of elements in Police Quest, like, you had to walk around the car to inspect that there was no damage on it. It was very meticulous, and I was amazed at all the different.
Let me give you an example. So the way that was originally, when I got to it, the way that worked was, if you went to the car and got in, you died, and it said, the error message was, "You're blowing it."
I didn't find out why.
So, so all those things that helped you figure out, I'm supposed to be doing this. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the stuff that I got involved with.
Yeah, you forgot your radio and then you die. And, it was like you had to take it in stages to complete it. It was great.
And the error message for that was, "You're blowing it." He only had one error message. Whenever anything went wrong, "You're blowing it."
Yeah, I even remember crossing the lights without sirens. Exactly, that would happen.
Oh, shoot.
Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago one of your games that's close to my heart, Leisure Suit Larry, which I played, many years underage. I was when I first got my hands on that game. But speaking of that, there was some quite unique protection at the beginning of that game, where you get asked a question that only adults would know the answer to.
Uh-huh.
Who came up with that idea?
Actually, that was Ken Williams' idea, because he was a big Trivial Pursuit fan. And he loved playing Trivial Pursuit, and so we played it a lot. My wife and Roberta and he and I. When we were talking about how the game was progressing, we said, well, geez, it's maybe we should have some sort of protection for kids so kids don't play the game. And so Ken K said, well, what if we just ask some trivia questions? So between me and him and a bunch of other people, we all wrote a few questions. Some of them turned out to be prescient. I don't know if you've seen the one about O.J. Simpson.
Yes.
But that was scary when I realized that, holy cow, we did that 10 years before it became reality. So.
Well, Ravi and I were saying before, we go and ask our parents and, pretend we're doing school homework and we needed the answers for the questions.
Yeah. Who was Spiro Agnew?
Or I'd know the answer to 3 questions, and I'd keep reloading the disc until I got the
until you got the right
combination
one,
with
yeah.
those 3
Oh
questions.
gosh, yeah. Well, I've talked to a lot of people who said when they got an answer right, they wrote it down. And of course, all you had to do was press Alt X.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I wasn't about to waste my time answering all those questions. Once I got the code in and it worked, well, the next thing I did was put in a cheat. And we were so naive. We figured, oh, who the hell's going to press these Alt keys, so we left all the debugging code in too. You could press Alt D and bring up the debugger, and then you could change variables and load, other images. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do in those early versions of the games, just because we didn't think anybody'd ever try it. So yeah, as I said, it was a simpler time.
So you were saying that Leisure Suit Larry initially didn't sell very well. What happened there?
I think what happened was Ken thought it was going to be less, more clean and less dirty than it turned out to be. Right. And so as we got closer to the time of shipping it, he got kind of wary of it and worried about maybe it would cause trouble for the company. Plus, the company was in pretty bad shape. As I recall, he offered me a hell of a deal if I wouldn't take any advances against future royalties, and instead take a larger royalty rate. In other words, I would take more risk because the company was that short of money that he didn't want to spend it paying me. And so I ended up taking huge royalty in exchange for taking no advances and just living off my wife's income and so forth, so that we could afford to do it. And so when the game shipped, I was really disappointed because it was like, man, this is terrible. But he did no advertising, did no marketing for the game. At that time, Radio Shack was 1/3 of all of Sierra's retail business. In other words, 1 out of every 3 games they sold went through Radio Shack. And Radio Shack was run by a CEO who was a born-again Christian. They did their own quality assurance testing of games and products before they sold them. And the poor guys who were doing the testing were scared to death to even look at the game for fear they'd get caught by the bosses and Christian guys and get thrown out for being nasty, dirty people. Radio Shack didn't take the game, so immediately 1/3 of our audience was gone. But interestingly enough, that worked to my advantage, because when the game did start to sell, people couldn't buy it at Radio Shack. They had to buy it somewhere else. And because Radio Shack was such a big customer, Ken gave them a really great price, which was nice because they sold a lot of product, but it meant I got a smaller number of cents out of each copy sold. And therefore, if you bought the game at Software Etc. or at Babbage's or someplace, I made more money on a copy than if you bought it at Radio Shack. So by having Radio Shack not sell it, I ended up making more money because of that. So at the time, it didn't seem like a good idea, but when the game's word of mouth started spreading, sales continued to grow, and each month for the first year, I think the sales doubled until after a year, Larry was in the top 10 with a bullet as a rising new star. And then you look closer and it says, weeks on the chart, 54.
Not quite so new.
What? How can that be? But yeah, after 54 weeks, it was I think it was number 3 or something nationally.
Well, I guess today they'd call that going viral, I guess, today, wouldn't they?
Well, we actually, because the copy protection was so weak and the game was loved by hackers, seemed to be universally loved by hackers. The game actually was widely pirated. It's always funny when I meet somebody and they say, "Oh, I played that game." And so my next question is always, "Well, did you pay for it?" And almost always the answer is, "I think I paid for some of the later ones."
I wasn't old enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to say that we invented shareware. We just didn't know it.
Yeah, well, they say that more copies of the hint book were actually sold than the original game.
Yeah, that is true. We and fortunately, I made good money on the hint books. Ken didn't want to put out hint books. He thought that the 900 phone number would make more money, which it probably did. But to me, I said, I think selling hint books, I think, is going to be a big profit margin. And he originally said, well, why don't you just do it and I'll sell them and then you can make all the money. And I should have jumped on that. But I was scared. And so I said, no, you publish it and I'll write them. And so I wrote the hint books. I think I had a 50% royalty rate. And so I did all the hint books for King's Quest and Space Quest. And I won Space Quest, and Scott caught on and said, hey, this is good money. I'll make money here too. So yeah, but I did a lot of the games just to get the hint book thing rolling.
I always remember one scene in Leisure Suit Larry when he went into the disco and everyone was kind of dressed in those kind of disco jumpsuits that Larry was wearing. Was it kind of an intentional thing? Because obviously by this point in the late 80s, disco was not cool anymore. Was that intentional to make Larry like that?
The whole idea was that Larry was this fish out of water, that he was a guy trying desperately to be cool, using the techniques that he heard about when he was in his 20s, and now he's like his late 30s, and he's totally out of it. So sure, the whole idea was to mock that culture. The game is based on an old game called soft porn, that was a huge hit in the early days of Sierra. Let's see, how can I say? When Time magazine ran its first column on home computers, the very first issue was about soft porn. And it was the cover was featured in the magazine, and it was a big deal. It was a really big deal at a time when Apple had sold 100,000 Apple IIs. Ken had sold 25,000 copies of soft porn. And everybody I knew had a pirated version. So it was pretty much 100% market penetration, at the time. It was a huge game. But when Ken got the rights to the Disney characters through a deal when Texas Instruments fell out of business, went under, and gave up on home computers. They owned the rights to all the Walt Disney characters, to all the Mattel characters, to Barbie and Sesame Street. I mean, just on and on. Texas Instruments bought up all the licensable characters they could find. And so Ken got a chance to grab the Disney characters for a song. So for a few years, for a year, I was like Walt Disney Software. I'd put out 2 or 3 games from the Disney characters, and somehow Disney didn't appreciate being in the same catalog with a game called Soft Porn Adventure. And by that time, the game had kind of run its course. And so Ken dropped Soft Porn in favor of the Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all those games.
That's quite a change.
But when we realized that the only person making money on these Disney games is Disney, that their royalty rate is so huge that there's nothing left for us. And because at that point in the early history of video games, people didn't respect licensed characters. Licensed properties were anathema to the audience because so many bad games had been created and had a licensed character slapped on them that people kind of hesitated before buying a game that was from a well-known character. They trusted us because we were just a bunch of guys, writing the best games we could. Even though I think our games, the Disney games, were good, they didn't sell that well. And part of it was that everybody assumed that they were easy games, even though they really weren't. We tried to make them as intricate and as interesting as we could. Yeah, so anyway, after a couple of years, we just said, to hell with the Disney characters. You can have them back, and we'll just produce our own stuff. And that's when we created Police Quest and Space Quest and Larry and Laura Bow and geez, just a whole flock of other characters. We didn't need Disney characters to make up stories. We did our own.
Well, when you got into the second Leisure Suit Larry game, I heard gamers of a certain age will all know that disc swapping was a real pain back then. I heard that you apparently made Leisure Suit Larry to reduce disc swapping the second game, and that didn't quite work as planned. Is that true?
I wanted to make a bigger game, but because Larry 1 was very open-ended and you could go anywhere at any time, you ended up having to swap discs in and out a lot. And so I thought it would be better to write a game that was linear, that had, well, nowadays we would call them levels, but back then they were areas. We had an area around Los Angeles, and when you got everything done there, you would get on this cruise ship, and you had that was disc 2, and when you got off the cruise ship, you got on this other thing, this island, that was 3, and you got on an airplane, that was 4, and so everything was, so you could play the game, and once you finished with a disc, you could put it away, and you'd start the next disc, and you would work on that for a while, and then you'd go to the next disc. And so I kind of conceived of the game as beads on a string, that there were 6 discs, 6 areas, and each was self-contained within one floppy. Now, of course, by the time that was over, most everybody had a hard drive. That's when hard drive prices got down low enough that most people could afford them, and so that was not really as important as it turned out to be. But I made some mistakes when I did that because, for example, you could leave Los Angeles without having the sunscreen. Well, you didn't need the sunscreen until 2 discs later. And by then, it was like, oh, you should have brought sunscreen. What the hell? I got to go back to a saved game from 2 weeks ago, So, yeah, so there were, I made some mistakes. But
if you played it properly, it was fine, though, yeah?
If you, yeah, I mean, and seriously, those were just errors on my part. It was not intentional. I wasn't trying to be cruel. It was just a design oversight. And, eventually I learned how not to do that, just like I learned how to get around death. We had a lot of complaints from people about dying, and that Sierra games, you died all the time. Well, yeah, so I thought, well, I took that personally. So I thought, oh, well, I'll design a game where there's no death. And so I did that with Larry 5, I think. And when I was done, not one single reviewer even mentioned it. And it's like, wait, you guys all bitched about this all these years, and now I go to all this trouble and I do a game where you can't die, and then nobody even notices. So after that, I just made deaths funny.
Well, we've noticed that you've done a Leisure Suit Larry Reloaded recently, and I guess you're bringing the old jokes back.
Times 10. We actually increased the number of lines of dialogue in the game from around 1,000, 1,500 to over 10,000. The new game is much more, I hate to say fleshed out. Oh, that's...
No pun intended.
Although it's that too, I guess. But yeah, we were fortunate enough to get a Kickstarter campaign, a successful campaign, and we raised a lot of money and ended up spending all of it and produced a game that I'm very proud of. We did the best that I could do. We hired a real comedy writer, Josh Mandel, to write tons of new gags and jokes, and we had a wonderful animation. Everything's in retina quality graphics, higher than high def graphics.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's and we had good animators who were enthralled, just pleased as hell that they got to do paper animation again. We got to draw all the pencil drawings and then scan them in just like the old days. So it's a real fluid looking animation style and beautiful backgrounds and everything. Josh just went through every piece of that game, and anything you could click on has got some kind of funny message involved with it. And the game did great. I mean, we pleased all of our Kickstarter people. I think we shipped within 15 months, which is kind of a record, because right after we started, the Space Quest guys started, and they still haven't shipped theirs. And several other games that have taken quite a bit longer than expected. But we got it done in 15 months, and the game went out and was hot on the Apple Store and on the Android Store for a few weeks, and then suddenly it just kind of fell beneath the waves of new games that are coming out, and so the sales overall have been. We didn't lose money, but on the other hand, we didn't make nearly enough to warrant doing another remake, and so that was disappointing. But at least we have a fun game that people can play today on tablets and phones and all the other things.
It's a long way from the old 5.25-inch floppies, isn't it?
Oh my God! Yeah, it's amazing the detail. I mean, your watch, and a smart watch today has more resolution than the entire screen did when we did the original games.
Yeah, the girls certainly look different in the new one.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
It's just great that a new generation of gamers will be able to experience this. The character of Larry, and it must be quite touching that 30 years later, people are still interested in this character that you came up with all those years ago.
If I had known that this was going to last this long, I would have done a better job. Yeah, people tell me about the theme song. People still end up whistling the theme song and stuff. And it's like, hell, I wrote that in like 15 minutes one night before dinner, because I didn't have any music in the game. I thought, I better put some kind of music in. What kind of song can I create? I didn't want to do. Every other game out back then had I don't know what you'd call it, kind of driving metal music. It was real hard and a hard rock kind of thing. And I thought, well, this is a goofy game. It shouldn't be like that. It should have goofy music. And so I wrote a goofy song, and I had no idea that it was people 30 years later would still be whistling it.
It gives that kind of sleazy Wild Western bar theme as well.
Tinkling piano in the other room.
Well, Al, it's been amazing reminiscing and getting some of your stories. And I'd implore anyone that hasn't tried the new version of Leisure Suit Larry, absolutely give it a buy on the Apple or the Android store.
Oh, it'd be a bargain at twice the price.
Well, Al, it's been brilliant talking to you. Just before you go, what are you up to these days?
I've been running allow.com humor site for 18 years now. And for 18 years, every weekday morning, I send out 2 jokes to a big mailing list of people. I call it Cyber Joke 3000. And it's free. All you have to do is go to the website and sign up. And every weekday morning, you'll get an email with 2 jokes, one of which is clean.
I'm just signing up now. So.
Not for the clean jokes, though.
No.
So I've got over 7,000 jokes. And besides, at my website, there's lots of stories. If you listen this long to me talk here, you want to go to my website, because I've got tons of inside stories and things about the old days at Sierra and stuff that nobody else, knows about. Plus, I have a joke database where you can enter in a phrase and lawyer, and you'll get back hundreds of lawyer jokes and blonde jokes and saxophone player jokes, and there's just it's a regular database. It does a Google search of all the 7,000 jokes that I've sent out so far, and it's really handy if you need a joke for something. There's plenty of jokes there.
There's probably some more Larry games in those jokes, I imagine.
There's some. Well, actually, the jokes came about because when I did the last Larry. Well, let me go back another step. All the Larry games had comedy shops or comedians or something in them because I've always collected jokes and I wanted a place to share them. And so that's why when you go to the Larry thing, there's all kinds of comedy comedians telling jokes because I had all these jokes saved up over the years. So when I stopped doing games, I had like 1,000 jokes. And I thought, what am I going to do with all these? I'm not doing games anymore. I'll give them away. So every morning I started mailing out 2 jokes. And what happened was people got on the mailing list and then they would start sending me jokes. So I've gotten I'm sure 100,000 jokes over the years, all of which I've read and gone through, and that's now the list is self-perpetuating. But I have to assure you that I never duplicate jokes. I'm very conscientious about not sending out the same joke twice, and I edit them all. I tighten them all. I correct the spelling. I correct the grammar. I tighten them, make the punchlines funnier, and then they can have it all for free because at some point they probably bought a Larry game.
Well, there's a couple of guys that grew up playing your games, Al. I mean, it's been amazing talking to you and getting your stories, so we really appreciate you coming on.
Love it. And I hope you can edit this down to something that's suitable for children.
Thanks very much, Al.
Thank you, Al.